Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Runaway Train Sports Podcast. This week, we have a really interesting game preview to talk about. We're going to be talking about Purdue's trip up north to Ann Arbor, Michigan, to take on the Michigan Wolverines today. And boy, will that be a tough one. And then I also want to touch on an interesting thing that keeps happening and just kind of my general thoughts about it. But we'll get to that towards the end. It's not going to be a big thing, but it's just something that I've noticed over the last couple of weeks and that I want to address as well as put out there because I think some people have been thinking about it a lot, and I think it's something that needs to be put out there a little more from people like me. So first, we're going to get started. We're going to take a look at Purdue's trip up to Michigan to take on the Wolverines. And boy, this is probably going to be Purdue's toughest game on the schedule, if anyone had any doubts about that. Taking on Michigan in Ann Arbor is tough enough already, unless you're Ohio State. And Purdue we saw what it was like for Purdue to go to one of the top teams in the Big Ten East last year when they traveled to Penn State. And we don't have to go into the details about that, but I think we all saw what happened. Not saying that there wasn't reasons for it, but I think the talent disparity as well as just the aspect of it being on the road at a place like Michigan is going to make this very tough. I would make some comparisons back to recent trips to Michigan, but in writing my game preview and preparing for this, I discovered something very interesting, and that is that Purdue and Michigan have actually only played, 3 times this decade already, going back all the way back to 2011, which was the last time that Purdue made the trip up to Michigan. And before that, the most recent one before that was actually 2009. So in an 11-year span, if we include this year, and including 2009, we played in 2009, 11, 12, and then not again until 2017 when Michigan made the trip to Ross-Ade in Jeff Brom's first season. And then this year will mark the 5th game since 2009 that Purdue has played Michigan. So Michigan not always on the schedule. Not that that's a bad thing, because not having to face some of the top teams in the Big Ten are definitely in Purdue's favor. So let's see, what has Michigan accomplished recently? Not to ask that question in a way of they haven't accomplished much, because they are still Michigan, and they definitely have solidified their place in the conference and sort of their place in college football as a whole. They recently have been essentially a lock for between 8 to 10 wins a year, always sit near the top of the Big Ten East. They have yet to win the Big Ten East, but they are routinely in the mix if Ohio State would ever get out of the way. In that they have struggled to take the next step. As I mentioned, they've not been able to get over the hump of beating Ohio State since Harbaugh took the helm of the Wolverines, and they seem to stumble in another game every year as well. Last year, Michigan was a bit up and down. They finished 9-4 overall and 6-3 in conference. So actually, kind of almost a down year when you look at their conference record. And then they finished their season in the Citrus Bowl with a 35-16 loss to the Crimson Tide of Alabama. And that was a game that I think a lot of people were looking forward to seeing just for a comparison's sake, because even Alabama last year had a bit of a down year, if you can call it that. But everyone was looking at it as an opportunity to see what Michigan would be like when they finally got to face another top team like Alabama, and it did not go well. I think Alabama just had a little too much speed on offense for Michigan to be able to handle it. And so it'll be interesting to see what they bring back this year compared to last year. And I believe that it will be another year where they have the opportunity to take a step forward. With some pieces that they lose, they have the opportunity to kind of retool themselves and try to do something maybe a little differently. I know that everyone always says that when you have some key pieces that end up leaving either to transfer graduation or leaving early for the NFL. But let's go ahead. Let's jump on into it. Let's take a look at the Michigan offense, which it's hard to say that it seemed like Michigan's going to struggle on offense after losing some of the pieces that they did. But even when they do lose those guys, you still have to go back to the fact that it is Michigan and they're still recruiting at a much higher level than most. And so it's a little more expected for, the next guy up to step up and take the reins. And this does seem to be one of those moments, as Michigan did lose their starting quarterback from the past 2 years in Shea Patterson, and as well as all but one starter from the offensive line. So they definitely will be retooling and figuring out a new interior to the offense, both under center and along the line. But, this is still an offense that last year averaged 31.7 points per game. And so, who ends up stepping up in the quarterback spot and what big boys end up coming out of camp along the line will be a thing to keep an eye on as well, and how soon that they can gel. And just touching on the offensive line, this almost seems like one of those games where you kind of want to catch Michigan earlier in the season. And I think Purdue kind of got the short end as they get it towards the middle, which is typically when, good units end up coming together. And so when you have that new offensive line, it can take a bit to work out all the kinks. And I think Purdue will be getting in there just at a point where they might be figuring out if they do end up figuring it out. So, all right, let's head to the arguably most important position on the offense. Quarterback, as I mentioned, Shea Patterson no longer running the offense. And so the responsibility seems to fall to either Dylan McCaffrey or Joe Milton. Both have seen the field recently, but not enough to say whether or not one has a leg up over the other. It seems like McCaffrey had been utilized more of a running threat, while Milton, being the opposite, has the opportunity to showcase his arm a bit, but maybe not so much, and his mobility. And so each has shown one skill set, but I don't think we've truly seen the whole package and to enough to be able to say who it'll be. It'll be interesting to see who gets the nod, but I think a lot of people are expecting to see both play probably pretty early and often. Now, I don't know if the losing of the non-conference slate is going to impact that at all. Those non-conference games, especially against the lower tier competitors, are definitely those moments where you can experiment a little more with breaking in new quarterbacks, trying to see who wants to step up over the other. So losing the non-conference may impact that a bit, but I think depending on their schedule, and actually let's take a look at their schedule. Bringing that up, I think that can be pretty interesting. And there has been some, I'll tangent quickly here, there has been some talks of some potential changes to the schedule. I know this past week being before July 30th, that the NCAA did allow teams to schedule games during week 0, which typically is less so. So it does provide another week that the scheduler is able to add games to be able to spread out their current games. So this brings up an interesting point of, are the entire schedules going to be reworked, maybe reordered? I think there's a definite possibility of that. And if so, it'll be interesting to see the order that this gets, because, man, I just pulled up Michigan's current slated schedule, and the beginning of the season is definitely not the time to be figuring out a new quarterback situation, and I'll read them off here. So they do lose their non-conference, like I mentioned, so they do not have to travel to Washington to open the season, which would have been tough. But then their next two are pretty much washes when they host Ball State and Arkansas State. But, all right, so those are canceled. Their theoretical beginning of the season starts with these games: home against Wisconsin, home against Penn State, travel to East Lansing to take on Michigan State, and then travel to Minnesota and take on the Gophers before Purdue comes to town. If you're trying to break in a quarterback, hosting Wisconsin, Penn State, and then traveling to Michigan State and Minnesota are probably not the games that you want, with the weakest in there probably being the trip to Minnesota. But PJ Fleck definitely had the Gophers rolling last year. While I do believe there will be some regression to the mean, they might have a lot of confidence going into that alleged October 17th matchup with the Wolverines coming to town. So that is not a slate you want to be breaking in quarterbacks. And so if they do have to pick a guy, I think it's going to be someone who can make the defenses work a little extra hard. And I think seeing the offense with Shea Patterson last year, who had the ability to run the ball, I personally almost give it up to Dylan McCaffrey more, just because he has shown the ability to move the ball with his legs. Again, I think that really comes down to his ability to throw the ball as well. Obviously, you need a little bit of both to be very successful. But I think if it comes down to it, especially with a retooling offensive line, having a guy that you know that can get out of the pocket and extend the play might be the way to go, at least in the beginning of the season. So I think I give the leg out to Dylan McCaffrey. But if Joe Milton comes out with a starting spot, I don't think anybody would be too surprised as well. So moving on to running back, let's see. It looks like it'll probably be a two-man game, kind of similar to the quarterback position, at least in the beginning, with Hassan Hankins and Zach Charbonnet. They both gave Michigan great production in last year, as Hankins finished with 622 yards on the ground and 4 touchdowns, and Charbonnet topped him with 726 yards and 11 touchdowns. So it seems like Charbonnet kind of took the lead role with plenty of Hankins mixed in there as well. So it seems like whoever is going to be on the field should expect to see the ball a lot and be expected to make some good plays, especially, as I mentioned, and keep mentioning, the retooling offensive line. And then lastly, the last part of the offense, people who got to catch the ball. Michigan returns their top 2 receivers from last year in Ronnie Bell and Nico Collins. Bell finished the year with just under 50 receptions for 760 yards and 4 touchdowns. And then Nico Collins tallied up 37 receptions for 730 yards and 7 touchdowns for him. So whoever wins the starting quarterback position should have a lot of options to throw to this season as they get their feet wet. And I think Michigan usually is in the same boat that I feel like Purdue is in right now, where as long as you can get your weapons the ball, I think they'll be able to take care of the rest. And so I think Michigan definitely has the receivers to do that. And so while there are definitely some questions surrounding a handful of positions, mainly the quarterback and offensive line, as I routinely touched on when looking at their offense, it is still Michigan. They should still be expected that they're going to have a high-powered offense with some very skilled players. Looking at the matchup with the Purdue defense, the Purdue defense has definitely struggled the last few years. I don't think it's shocking to say that. And I think even a retooling Michigan offense is still going to be plenty talented enough to take advantage of a retooling Purdue defense, as well as a new scheme that Purdue will still be trying to work out the kinks to, as well as just a younger core with some guys who, are going to have to step up if Purdue's going to have any chance on defense this year. So this one, putting it lightly, it will be really tough for Purdue, and I think they're going to have to play an absolute perfect game on defense to give Purdue a shot here, and even then, it may not be enough. It may take an absolute collapse by the Michigan offense, but I think at the end of the day, it's going to have to come down to stopping the run and then doing enough in pass defense to get stops. And I, at this point, having not seen the new Purdue 3-4 defense and the idea of going to Michigan to take on the Wolverines definitely doesn't sound good. So I would definitely give the edge up to Michigan and the Purdue defense versus the Michigan offense lineup. Moving on to the Michigan defense, and before we get there, I'm going to take a quick break. We'll be right back to cover the Michigan defense as well as special teams, and then we'll move on to our game outlook. Sorry. See you in a minute. And welcome back. We'll now be moving on to, as I mentioned, taking a look at the Michigan defense. And I say this in comparison more to last year as well as going forward. As impressive as Michigan can be on offense, it's usually their defense that is their calling card. And I think that, this is going to be Purdue's side of the ball in this game, as it will be in most games this season. But the Michigan defense has routinely been extremely, extremely aggressive and impressive outside of the Ohio State game. Last year, they held opponents to under 21 points per game and relevantly, they held them to just 185 yards passing and then 121 yards on the ground. So definitely some impressive numbers coming from the Michigan defense. Looking at some of the personnel quickly, the linebacker position is definitely going to be a position of strength for Michigan. They have a lot of guys returning in Cameron McGrone, Josh Ross, and Michael Barrett. They probably will return as the top three guys. And when you can have that much production returning, they definitely will be a formidable group. They going into this year, they probably want to continue to focus on excelling in the pass rush, as the entire Michigan defense finished last season with 36 sacks on the season. And so they definitely show aggression and are definitely willing to get to the quarterback. And I think that's going to be something to keep an eye on for Purdue, because if keeping the quarterback clean is going to be a key to the season, and this Michigan defense will want to attack early and often. And so when linebackers are being aggressive, they then have to rely on the secondary to make the plays necessary. And this is where I don't know if you can say fall short, but last season they only intercepted 9 passes on the season. And so they definitely will be wanting to improve that. Some names to keep an eye on in the secondary will be Ambry Thomas, Brad Hawkins, Daxton Hill. Hawkins and Hill returned after playing in all 13 games a year ago, and so they have plenty of experience to bring to the table. I think they're going to be keys to an aggressive defense like Michigan does, as I mentioned, as when you're not keeping your linebackers in short coverage, you're kind of relying on the athleticism of the secondary to take away the offensive weapons and at the receiver position. So I think they're definitely going to be looking to generate more turnovers as well as find some success in pass defense. And then lastly on defense, we have, as I always like to say, the big boys up front, the defensive line. They do have a pair of defensive ends that did put in some serious work from last year. They have Kwity Paye, I'm probably murdering that name, so I apologize, and Aiden Hutchinson. Paye had 6.5 sacks in 2019, and Hutchinson finished with 4.5 as well, to go along with 68 total tackles. So these are some guys who are setting the edge, getting to the quarterback, and generating a lot of pressure. And so I think it's going to be very imperative that the Purdue offensive line get their stuff together early and expect to be put into some tough situations when they go to Ann Arbor this year. So I think it's going to be a defense that is going to challenge Purdue's offense, and I think it could be a tough one for the Boilers at the end of the day. And so it really boils down to, the Michigan defense is always going to be their strongest side of the ball. They recruit big, fast, physical guys and try to eat up offenses at every opportunity. And so looking at the Purdue-specific matchups, I think the Purdue offense is definitely going to have to play, not necessarily a perfect game, but they're definitely going to have to play an above-average game, more specifically along the offensive line. If the offensive line has a better-than-average game, I think Purdue has more of a shot when they have the ball. I think the fact that Michigan's breaking in a pair of new quarterbacks, I forgot to mention that in the secondary, but they do have to replace both cornerbacks. So I think that may help. But again, when you recruit big, fast guys, I think those kind of translate the easiest. So it is Michigan on the road. Purdue's going to have to play a really, really good game to have a shot. And this is going to be a tough one, and it's hard to find bright spots. The easy bright spots are always going to be David Bell, Rondell Moore, Milton Wright, Ahmad Anderson Jr., Malik Carr, Abdir Raham Yassin. Murdered that name. I apologize. It's going to be tough. It's going to be a tough one for Purdue, and it's not going to get easier depending on who has the ball. So Purdue's going to have to play well, and if not, it could be a Penn State of 2019. But we're not getting there yet. We're taking a look at Michigan's special teams, and it's interesting to see Michigan utilize a kicking rotation from 2019. And I'm not really sure if that should be expected again in 2020, but time will tell with that. Last season, Jake Moody and Quinn Nordin rotated, taking kicks for Michigan, with Moody finishing 6 of 9 with a long of 43, and then Nordin finished 10 of 13 with a long of 57. So Nordin definitely has the leg, and I wouldn't be surprised to see if they pare down that a bit to give him the full-time job. Will Hart returns as the punter after finishing with a very good 44 yards per punt, and then actually finished with 15 punts of over 50 yards. So if they do ever have to punt, I think they definitely have a weapon behind them that should be able to give them play the field position game well. In terms of the returning duties, they have Giles Jackson. He'll probably handle both punt and kickoff returns. He did take a kick 97 yards for a touchdown in 2019, and so he is definitely going to be someone to keep an eye on in the return game. And so finally we reach our last game outlook for Michigan, and I think if you've been listening so far, you can kind of tell my initial thoughts on how this game could go. It's going to be their toughest game of the season without a doubt. Couple the skill gap and talent gap with the fact that Purdue, one, just doesn't win in Ann Arbor and just doesn't go there that often. It could be a long day for Purdue. Michigan has a good mix of returning talent and younger prospects, so they're definitely going to be a mixed bag. But I mean, they're going to be a top 25 team, potentially even a top 10 team, as they usually are at the beginning of the season, and they are going to be better than Purdue. I think it's going to take an effort similar to the Ohio State game in 2018. It's going to have to take an inspired effort, and a Michigan team that maybe is looking past Purdue a bit. Going back to their schedule, and I'm going to quickly pull that back up because I think this could be if the schedule does stay the same way that it is currently listed here, maybe just moved forward to the beginning of the season, I think the only shot Purdue has is if Michigan doesn't mentally prepare for them, because as I did say, they're currently slated to start the conference season with home against Michigan, home against Penn State, travel to rival Michigan State, and then travel to probably a hyped up Minnesota team. And so those first 4 games have the potential to really take their eyes off the ball, if possible, to where then they may look ahead and go, oh, the next game is just Purdue. Well, we can take it easy and we'll have this in the bag. I think that's one of Purdue's only chances in this is if they do overlook Purdue and we have a Ohio State 2018 moment where Purdue comes ready to play and Michigan does not. But even then, it's going to be tough. It's going to be hard. I almost wish that this game and the game from 2017 were reversed, where I would have much rather have gone to Ann Arbor in 2017 in Jeff Brom's first season, where we had the better run defense specifically, and an okay offense, a very okay offense. Where you go that season, you travel to Ann Arbor, you lose. I think that's obviously understandable. And then imagine this Michigan team coming to Ross-A to play this Purdue team, and I think that could be a fun one, especially with Michigan's opening slate. But seeing as it is what it is, and that Purdue hasn't won in Ann Arbor since 2009. And then before that, they hadn't won since the 1960s. I think this is going to be a very tough one. And then it could be bad. It could be close. Who knows? Purdue played Michigan pretty close in 2017. Of course, again, that was with a much better defense. So who knows what could happen? College football is interesting like that, where anything could happen on any given Saturday. And I, for one, will definitely be watching with a small modicum of hope and optimism. But I go in with tempered expectations in terms of this game. As always, I'm not going to go into my score prediction here. You're going to have to head over to boilerinTexas.com. You can find my full written game preview there, as well as my official score prediction, as well as leave any of your comments on how you feel about the game there as well. Or if you'd like, you can always tweet me or find me on Instagram, both Boiler in Texas, and let me know your thoughts on Purdue's trip to Michigan. That's going to wrap up our Michigan preview. We're going to take another quick break, and then we're going to cover an interesting topic that has been circulating recently and some less than stellar optimism in the college football community. But we'll be right back, and then we'll get into that. And welcome back once again. We now move on to what I think is a very important thing to talk about right now. And I kind of, something to keep in mind, that's kind of been circulating, at least amongst some Purdue fans and some college football fans in general that I've seen online, is that, and I'm referencing this more in from my own perspective of, trying to build this brand and start this brand of Boiler in Texas and this Runaway Train Sports podcast, which I appreciate you listening to, by the way. I think this is something that, I see a lot when I post a lot of my stuff online. I try and, get it out there. And I routinely have people always leave comments and feedback saying, why are you doing this? We're not having a season anyway. Or I'll ask a question about a game and say, what do you think of, Purdue's game against X, against Michigan? We'll just say against Michigan, as we talked about them today. And I'll probably post this, and I probably will get at least a handful of comments saying it won't matter because it's not going to happen, or every team's going to finish undefeated because there's going to be no games played. And my response to that is always, or to the people who always ask me why I'm doing this when the season's not going to happen, when all this is happening, you just don't know what's happening. And I think that last point is exactly it. We don't know what's happening. The only thing that has officially happened as of right now is that the Big Ten has canceled non-conference games and that they are presumably working on reworking the schedule to spread out games and only play a conference slate. And that is all the information we have right now. The NCAA is kicking the can down the road in terms of what to expect and what to regulate and what to, moderate across all programs if possible. And so as of right now, I am operating under the assumption that college football will happen. There are plenty of people out there who are adamant that it will. And so as of right now, and until the changes, we're going to be chugging along. We're going to be providing, or at least my goal is to provide content that people enjoy reading and podcasts that people enjoy listening to, as well as, get my enjoyment out of it. I enjoy writing about Purdue sports. I enjoy talking about Purdue sports. And so why would I want to, stop? Why would I want to assume the worst and not get to talk about the idea of Rondale Moore and David Bell playing on the same field at the same time? Who wouldn't want to talk about that? And so when people always come to me saying, why do you keep doing this? It's not going to happen. It doesn't matter. One, there is a possibility of that. I do acknowledge that. I think as of right now, there is a lot happening that people are still trying to figure out. I think the NBA is showing how to do sports correctly. But of course, that's easier to do in NBA basketball than it is in college football. I think the MLB, and specifically the Miami Marlins, is showing how not to do it. And I think Rutgers is also showing a very clear reason of how not to do it. And so I think there are experiences going on that are showing, pros and cons for ways to handle COVID-19. And so until something officially happens, until they officially make the move to spring, or if they officially just make the move to cancel the season, I am going to continue to operate as if the season will happen, as at least as much of information as we have now. I mentioned in the Michigan preview section that the schedules are set as they are right now. Presumably they will change, but until they do, I will continue to give my thoughts and opinions on the current setup of the schedule, and if I need to, I can do revised versions later. And so I am enjoying myself doing this. I think a lot of people who enjoy talking and conversing about college sports they still enjoy it. I think they enjoy the little wrinkle that this is adding to a bit of uncertainty, but I want to continue to do this to provide some sense of normalcy as well, that even though things are changing all the time and this pandemic is still happening all over this country, I want to continue to provide a steady source of Purdue content for the Purdue community or anyone who wants to read about it. Even opposing teams. I know sometimes I like to go to opposing teams, specifically SB Nation blogs, because they're pretty accessible, and read their thoughts on upcoming matchups with Purdue. So anyone who wants to come read my stuff, I want to continue to produce it. I want to continue to put it out there, and I want to continue to try and build my brand as much as I can. And I think that's that. I think a lot of people out there are going to be pessimistic about this season and have already resigned it to either not happening or just being pushed off until maybe this spring, which I don't see the feasibility of that either. So I think it's going to be an all or nothing situation. And I hope that it happens. I hope that it happens with some sense of normalcy. But in the end of the day, as of right now, I want Purdue sports to happen. I want Purdue football to happen. I want Purdue volleyball to happen. I want all of Purdue fall sports to happen. So I'm going to continue to operate as if they are. And so I'm going to continue to putting out these game previews written weekly, as well as record one of these podcasts every week. And then hopefully when we get some good news down the line, I'll be able to record more of these, as well as get some more written content out as well. So that's my mini rant on the current level of pessimism in the college football and college sports community. I'm not saying that I'm all sunshine and rainbows. I do see warning signs that are happening, but I'm hoping that people can correct themselves early enough that we'll get what we want. And what we want is, again, to see Rondell Moore and David Bell play at Purdue at the same time, because it would be the most Purdue thing ever to only get to see one season and 4 games of Rondell Moore, rather. So that's just my quick little mini rant. Thank you for indulging me. That's actually going to wrap up episode 7 of the Runaway Train Sports Podcast for July 30th. I hope you enjoyed our Michigan preview, and I hope you got some insights from a little rant that I went on there towards the end. I thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this podcast, consider rating it on whatever platform you're using to listen to it. I really appreciate it. It really helps me out. And if you have any thoughts and opinions on what I've said, feel free to reach out to me on social media, or you can find me at boilerinTexas.com. Stay tuned as we continue on with our season previews for 2020 Purdue football. Have a great week. And as always, boiler up, hammer down, hail Purdue.